2 weeks later, Marcus sat on his newly installed patio furniture, enjoying the expanded space where his pool once stood. The new fire pit crackled merrily as he sipped his morning coffee, checking emails on his tablet. The divorce paperwork had finally been processed, and while the settlement had been painful, at least that chapter was closing. He'd even started dating again. Coffee next Saturday with a teacher he'd met at his community college night class. A commotion down the street caught his attention. A city van marked Code Enforcement was parked in front of Diane's house, alongside two official-looking SUVs. Men in polo shirts with city emblems were taking measurements and photographs of her property. Diane stood on her front porch, gesturing wildly, her voice carrying even at this distance. "This is outrageous. Do you know who my husband is? I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Check out Hurricane Diane's forecast. Category 5 meltdown in progress." By afternoon, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. Tom stopped by with the inside scoop from his brother at city planning. Someone sent the city drone footage of her property, showing multiple code violations. Tom explained, barely containing his glee. They found six separate violations, including that monstrosity of a shed. But here's the real kicker. They discovered she's running an unlicensed day spa business from her basement. "You're kidding," Marcus said, genuinely shocked. "Nope. She's been doing Botox injections without proper licensing or medical supervision. That's why she was so obsessed with keeping city officials away from the neighborhood. She's facing about $30,000 in fines and potential criminal charges for the unlicensed medical procedures." "Any idea who reported her?" Marcus asked. Tom grinned. The footage came from Jenkins' kid's drone, the same family whose car she tried to have towed. But get this, they only sent in the footage because they were trying to report a water drainage issue affecting multiple properties. They didn't even know about her other violations. Those were just visible in the background. Over the next week, the neighborhood transformed. The Rodriguez children resumed their basketball games. The Patels cat sunned itself peacefully on the sidewalk. 3 different neighbors who had previously kept to themselves stopped by to thank Marcus for standing up to Diane during the pool incident, which had apparently become neighborhood legend. Friday evening, Marcus returned home to find an envelope in his mailbox. An invitation to a neighborhood block party, the first in years. "To celebrate our community," it read, with a notable absence of Diane's name on the host committee. As Marcus walked up his driveway, he spotted Diane across the street, struggling to load boxes into her car. A Thor SAAE sign had appeared in her yard that morning. When she noticed him looking, she quickly averted her eyes and hurried back inside. Sometimes, Marcus murmured to himself as he unlocked his front door, "Karma doesn't just knock, it brings official paperwork, takes measurements, and issues citations." That evening, as neighbors gathered in his backyard around the new fire pit, a community forming where his solitary pool once stood, Marcus couldn't help but feel that sometimes the universe balances its own equations perfectly. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had climbed to 93 degrees, and Marcus and Pete were drenched in sweat. They just hauled another section of metal frame to Marcus's pickup when the gate swung open again. Marcus tensed, expecting Diane's return, but instead found his next-door neighbor Tom carrying a cooler. "Thought you boys could use something cold," Tom said, lifting the lid to reveal ice-filled bottles of water and beer. "Saw the commotion earlier. Diane strikes again, huh?" Marcus gratefully accepted a water bottle. "You know her?" Tom's face darkened. "The whole neighborhood knows Hurricane Diane by now. 8 months here, and she's filed complaints against half the residents." As they hydrated, Tom shared the neighborhood horror stories. Diane had called animal control on the elderly Patels because their cat sometimes sat on her side of the property line. She'd reported the Rodriguez family for their children's weekend basketball games, claiming unsanctioned sporting events. 3 weeks ago, she'd even called a tow truck for the Jenkins car, parked legally on a public street, because it decreased property values. "What's her deal?" Pete asked. "Power trip. Apparently she moved here from some fancy gated community in Connecticut. Tom explained. She keeps trying to enforce rules from her old place. But here's the kicker. He leaned in, lowering his voice. She's got a 2-story garden shed and fence extension that violates at least 3 city codes. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're kidding. Nope. My brother works for the city planning department. Tom continued. Her shed exceeds height limitations by 4 feet, violates setback requirements, and was built without permits. And that fancy fence she installed blocks the drainage easement. She's got about $20,000 worth of illegal structures while she's running around policing everyone else. Why hasn't anyone reported her? Pete asked. Tom shrugged. Most folks just try to avoid her. Plus, she's connected. Her husband's some big shot at the mayor's office. At least, that's what she tells everyone. As Tom left, Marcus noticed Diane's curtains twitching. She was watching them, phone probably still in hand. Want to report her? Pete suggested. Would serve her right. Marcus considered it for a moment, then shook his head. Let's just finish the pool. I've got enough battles right now, with the divorce and all. Karma has a way of working these things out. Little did Marcus know how prophetic those words would prove to be. Tom returned 20 minutes later, this time with a plate of sandwiches his wife had made. Carol insisted, he explained, setting them down on a lawn chair Marcus had set up in the shade. Said you've got enough going on without having to worry about lunch. The simple kindness caught Marcus off guard. Since the divorce, he'd grown accustomed to handling everything alone. Neighbors had been politely sympathetic when Elaine moved out, but most had kept their distance, unsure which side to take or how to navigate the new social dynamic. The transformation of Marcus's backyard had become symbolic of the neighborhood's renewal. Where the stagnant pool once served as a painful reminder of his past, the welcoming fire pit now represented new beginnings. The Rodriguez family brought homemade salsa, the Patels contributed samosas, and even Jenkins, whose drone footage had inadvertently triggered Diane's downfall, arrived with his famous barbecue ribs. You know, we should do this more often, Mrs. Rodriguez suggested as conversation flowed easily among neighbors who had previously exchanged little more than polite waves. Maybe a monthly thing. I'd be happy to host next time, Tom offered, raising his beer in a gesture that felt like a toast to new friendships. As darkness fell, and the fire cast warm light on the gathering, Marcus found himself sharing the story of his pool removal saga with newcomers who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. The tale had already taken on almost mythical qualities, each retelling slightly more dramatic than the last. Did she really tell the police you were running an illegal construction company? Mr. Patel asked incredulously. According to the officer, something like that, Marcus confirmed, smiling now at what had seemed so infuriating just 2 weeks ago. Jenkins, who had remained relatively quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. You know what's ironic? If she hadn't caused such a scene about your pool, I might never have thought to check the drone footage for drainage issues. And if she hadn't tried to have your car towed, you might not have been motivated to look into her background in the first place, Tom added. Full circle, Marcus said, nodding thoughtfully as he poked at the fire. Her need to control everyone else ultimately exposed what she was hiding. Across the street, Diane's house stood dark and quiet. The 4 SAAE sign barely visible in the moonlight. According to Tom's brother, she and her husband had separated following the scandal, her carefully constructed facade of importance shattered beyond repair. As the gathering wound down and neighbors departed with promises to reconvene soon, Marcus remained by the fire, savoring the peaceful conclusion to what had begun as a simple home improvement project. The embers glowed orange and red, reminding him of sunrise rather than sunset, a fitting metaphor for this new chapter in his life. Marcus Johnson stared at the murky water of his once pristine backyard pool, watching a family of frogs that had taken up residence in what had become an expensive eyesore. The above-ground pool, a $15,000 investment that had once been the crown jewel of neighborhood summer parties, now sat neglected, a painful reminder of the lively family home his house used to be before his divorce and his kids leaving for college. The pool's pump had given out last month, leaving the water stagnant and green. When Marcus got the repair quote of $1,200, he made his decision. Between the looming expense, the chemical costs, and the fact his homeowner's insurance had nearly doubled because of the pool, it was time for it to go. After discovering a local contractor wanted $3,500 for removal, Marcus decided to handle it himself, even buying a specialized wet/dry vacuum and renting a small excavator from the local hardware store. Skills from his construction days would finally pay off. He meticulously planned the removal for the upcoming 3-day weekend, even creating a detailed timeline that would minimize disruption. Marcus texted his immediate neighbors who shared fence lines, promising to keep the noise reasonable and offering them first dibs on any salvageable materials they might want. Marcus hadn't always been this solitary, planning major projects alone on holiday weekends. 5 years ago, this would have been a family decision, with Elaine weighing in on what would replace the pool and the kids begging to keep it for just one more summer. But things had changed so gradually and then all at once. First, Maya left for UCLA, basketball scholarship in hand, her summers filled with training camps rather than backyard swimming. Then Jason headed to MIT, more interested in robotics competitions than cannonballs off the diving board. The pool parties dwindled, becoming more about Marcus and Elaine entertaining friends than family gatherings. Then came the layoff. 22 years at Westfield Manufacturing, climbing from the shop floor to operations manager, only to be let go during a corporate restructure. Nothing personal, just numbers, his boss had said, not meeting his eyes while sliding the severance package across the desk. The 18 months that followed tested everything, their savings, their marriage, Marcus's sense of self-worth. He found work eventually, a position at a smaller company with decent pay, but none of the seniority or benefits he'd accumulated over 2 decades. By then, the cracks in their relationship had spread too wide to repair. Elaine moved out last spring, taking the living room furniture and leaving him the pool responsibilities they'd once shared. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago, surprisingly amicable but no less painful for it. The kids still visited on holidays, but they were adults now with their own lives. The last time they'd all been in the pool together was 3 summers ago, a memory Marcus replayed often during his lonelier moments. A splash pulled him from his thoughts as a bullfrog leaped from the pool's edge into the murky water. Marcus checked his watch. 4:30 p.m. on Friday. His brother-in-law Pete would arrive in a few hours to help with the project. Despite everything, Pete had remained firmly in Marcus's corner through the divorce, maintaining that family isn't just about marriage certificates. The gesture meant more than Marcus could express. The supplies were already stacked neatly in the garage: PVC cutters, wrenches, screwdrivers, heavy-duty garbage bags, and work gloves. The wet/dry vacuum was rented and would be picked up first thing tomorrow morning along with the small excavator, a splurge, but worth it to avoid days of manual digging. Marcus had watched 14 YouTube tutorials on pool removal, taking notes and creating a step-by-step plan that now hung on his refrigerator door. This project was about more than just removing an eyesore or saving on insurance premiums. It represented taking control again, reshaping his environment to match his new reality rather than clinging to remnants of the past. Where the pool now stood, Marcus envisioned a fire pit with comfortable seating, a new gathering place that would suit his life as it was, not as it had been. He took one last photo of the pool to send to the kids. They deserved a chance to say goodbye, even if only virtually, then headed inside to prepare for the weekend ahead. For the first time in months, Marcus felt something like anticipation. Something was ending, yes, but something new was beginning too. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for the project. Marcus and his brother-in-law Pete, who'd driven 3 hours to help, had just finished setting up their equipment when the distinctive sound of someone clearing their throat cut through the noise of the wet/dry vacuum. Marcus turned to find a well-dressed woman with immaculately highlighted hair and oversized sunglasses standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed and foot tapping impatiently. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice carrying the practiced indignation of someone accustomed to getting her way. "Removing my pool," Marcus replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "And you are?" "Diane Winters, 1487 Oakwood Drive," she announced as if her name should immediately command respect. "I'm on the Neighborhood Beautification Committee, and you absolutely cannot do this without proper approval." Marcus exchanged a confused glance with Pete. "There's no beautification committee here. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. Diane's perfectly made-up face flushed. "Well, there should be. And regardless, you need HOA approval for structural changes." "We don't have an HOA," Marcus countered, his patience wearing thin as precious daylight wasted away. "Look, Ms. Winters, I've already checked the local ordinances. I'm removing a structure, not building one, and I'm well within my rights. That equipment is a violation of noise ordinances," she insisted, pulling out her phone and aiming it at them. "I'm documenting everything. You have 15 minutes to shut this down, or I'm calling the authorities." Pete whispered, "Who the hell is this lady?" while Marcus just shook his head and returned to work, the weight of his recent divorce and financial struggles making this unwelcome interruption all the more frustrating. Diane didn't leave as Marcus had hoped. Instead, she positioned herself at the edge of his property, phone raised, narrating loudly into it as if creating some sort of documentary evidence. Saturday, 9:17 a.m. Subjects continue unauthorized demolition, despite being informed of violations. Older subject appears to be directing operations, while younger subject operates heavy machinery without visible safety equipment or permits. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd been meticulous about permits, confirming with the county that pool removal required none. As for safety equipment, both he and Pete wore work gloves, protective eyewear, and steel-toed boots, standard precautions he'd insisted on from his years in manufacturing. "Pete," he called, keeping his voice level, "let's drain the north side first. The slope will help with water flow." He deliberately ignored Diane, hoping she'd grow bored with their lack of reaction. No such luck. Diane edged closer to the pool, her designer shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass. "That water looks contaminated. Are you planning to just dump chemicals into the groundwater? I'm adding environmental violations to my report." That was enough. Marcus set down his tools and approached her, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for a proper conversation. "Ms. Winters, the pool has been treated with the recommended neutralizing chemicals for the past week in preparation for draining. The water is safe for lawn discharge according to county guidelines. I followed every regulation to the letter." Diane's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "And how would you know county guidelines? Are you some kind of expert?" "Actually," Pete interjected with poorly concealed satisfaction. He was environmental compliance manager at Westfield Manufacturing for 8 years before becoming operations manager. He literally wrote their water discharge protocols. Marcus hadn't planned to share his credentials, but Pete's defense touched him. The layoff had been humiliating enough without broadcasting his employment history to hostile strangers. Diane seemed momentarily thrown off balance, but quickly recovered. "Well, I've already contacted my friend on the city council. We'll see what he has to say about this disruption." She emphasized the last word as if demolishing a private pool was equivalent to setting off fireworks at midnight. "I guess we will," Marcus replied evenly, returning to work. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you'd step back from the edge of the pool. For safety reasons." He gestured to her impractical footwear, stiletto sandals that were completely inappropriate for construction areas. "Are you asking me to leave public property?" she demanded, voice rising. "No, ma'am. I'm asking you to step back from my private property for your own safety," Marcus clarified, his patience thinning, but his tone remaining professional. "The edge of that pool isn't stable." As if to prove his point, the soil beneath Diane's right foot gave way slightly. Marcus and Pete had made significant progress. The pool was half drained, and they'd dismantled a quarter of the metal frame, when the unmistakable red and blue lights of a police cruiser reflected off his house windows. 2 officers, one veteran and one rookie by the looks of them, came through the side gate, that Marcus had left open for ventilation. "Afternoon, gentlemen," the older officer said, hand resting casually on his belt. "We received a report about illegal construction and possible trespassing at this address." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "Are you serious? This is my home." The younger officer looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we have a complaint from a Ms. Winters claiming unauthorized individuals are destroying property without permits. She also mentioned possible theft of materials." From his peripheral vision, Marcus spotted Diane standing across the street, phone still raised, a smug smile playing on her lips as she recorded the entire interaction. Several other neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the scene unfold with curious expressions. "I'm Marcus Johnson. I've owned this house for 15 years, he said, pulling out his wallet. "Here's my ID with this address. And that's my brother-in-law, Pete. We're removing my pool, not building anything. No permits required for removal in this county." The veteran officer examined his ID and nodded. "And the equipment?" "Rented from Taylor's Hardware on Main. Receipts in my wallet," Marcus replied, growing increasingly frustrated at having to justify legal actions on his own property. The officers conferred briefly. Then the older one handed back Marcus's ID. "Everything checks out, sir. Sorry for the disturbance." As they turned to leave, the veteran officer leaned in and spoke quietly. "Just so you know, filing false reports is taken seriously by the department. This is the third call like this we've had this month from that address. Might be worth mentioning if it continues." Across the street, Diane's triumphant expression faltered as the officers approached her. The conversation was too distant to hear, but her animated gestures and increasingly flushed face told Marcus everything he needed to know. "Your new neighbor seems delightful," Pete remarked sarcastically, hefting a section of pool frame. "Does she usually spend her weekends harassing people?" "First time she's targeted me," Marcus replied, glancing at his watch. They'd lost nearly an hour of valuable work time. "But according to what the officer just said, I'm not the first." The confrontation with the police had drawn attention. Marcus noticed Mrs. Patel from next door watching from her porch, along with the Rodriguez family, who'd paused their gardening to observe. Two teenagers on bikes had stalked across the street, not even pretending they weren't watching the drama unfold. Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He'd always been a private person, and becoming the neighborhood spectacle was deeply uncomfortable. "We've got an audience," Pete muttered, noticing Marcus's discomfort. "Let's just focus on the job," Marcus replied, trying to ignore the stares. The officers were still speaking with Diane, who had transitioned from smug to indignant. Her voice carried across the street in fragments. "Absolutely irresponsible. Drainage issues. Property values. Obligation to report." The older officer's posture had shifted, his stance wider, one hand raised in a calming gesture that seemed to have the opposite effect on Diane. The rookie was writing something in a small notebook, his expression carefully neutral. Finally, the officers returned to their cruiser. As they pulled away, Diane stormed toward her house, slamming her front door with enough force that Marcus could hear it from his backyard. "Think that's the end of it?" Pete asked hopefully. Marcus shook his head. "Not a chance." The Rodriguez father approached the fence line, giving a small wave. "Hey, Marcus. Everything okay?" "Just a misunderstanding," Marcus replied, not wanting to escalate neighborhood tensions. Mr. Rodriguez nodded knowingly. "She called the city about our basketball hoop last month. Said it was an unauthorized structure." He shook his head. "Some people have nothing better to do, man." "How'd that turn out?" Marcus asked. City inspector came out, confirmed it was properly installed, and left. Waste of everyone's time. Rodriguez glanced toward Diane's house. "She's been quiet for a couple weeks. Guess she needed a new target." Marcus felt a mix of relief and annoyance. Relief that he wasn't being singled out, and annoyance that this was apparently a pattern no one had managed to disrupt. "That's really thoughtful," Marcus said, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "Please thank her for me." As they took a much-needed break, Tom lowered his voice. "There's more about Diane you should know. Jenkins, the guy whose car she tried to have towed, he's a private investigator." Pete nearly choked on his sandwich. No way. Tom nodded, a gleam in his eye. Professional curiosity got the better of him after the towing incident. He did some digging. Turns out her husband isn't with the mayor's office at all. He's a junior account manager at an insurance firm in the city. And that fancy Connecticut community she claims to be from. She lived in a regular apartment complex there, not some exclusive gated community. So she's just making it all up? Marcus asked, bewildered by the revelation. Reinventing herself. Tom corrected. Jenkins thinks she's trying to establish herself as some kind of neighborhood authority figure. He found old social media posts where she complained about being ignored by the HOA in her previous community. Seems like she moved here and decided to become the HOA herself. Pete let out a low whistle. That's some serious commitment to a power fantasy. It gets weirder, Tom continued, clearly enjoying being the bearer of neighborhood gossip. According to Jenkins, there's unusual activity at her house during weekdays. Multiple women arriving in expensive cars, staying for an hour or two, then leaving. Always when her husband's at work. Marcus frowned. What kind of activity? He's not sure, Tom admitted. But they all leave wearing sunglasses, even on cloudy days, and they're always touching their faces when they exit. Jenkins has a theory, but he's being careful not to spread rumors without proof. Marcus wasn't interested in speculating about Diane's personal life, regardless of how she treated him. Let's focus on what we know for sure. She's making our lives difficult today, and she's got structures that violate city codes while she's reporting everyone else. Speaking of which, Tom said, glancing toward the street, her car just pulled out of the driveway. Might be a good time to get the noisiest part of your project done while she's away. Marcus nodded gratefully. Good call. Thanks for the heads up, and for the food. As Tom headed back to his own yard, Marcus and Pete returned to work with renewed energy. The pool was coming apart faster now that they'd found an efficient rhythm, and the brief respite from Diane's surveillance was a welcome relief. Think she's gone to file another complaint? Pete asked as they lifted a heavy section of the pool's metal wall. Probably, Marcus replied. But at this rate, we'll have most of it dismantled before anyone else shows up.